kind of explain what we ended up with. So first off, as a company, we wanted to keep things small. When we left Blizzard, we'd gotten Blizzard North, the Diablo II team, of about 80 people. And just because it... all right. I can read all that wonderful text. So we want to keep the team pretty small. We just find it's easier to work with a small team. Everybody stays focused. We want everybody to participate in all sorts of aspects of design. So a character animator might have comments on background art. You might have a comment on game balance. And we like that feedback. We think it keeps everybody more involved, and it keeps you excited about the project, especially if you're working, as many hours it takes to create games these days. You want everybody to be excited for as long as possible. So then, like I mentioned earlier, we were new. We only had 9 guys. We needed to get the proof of the concept of the game to publishers as quick as we could. We didn't have time to spend a year developing an engine, and then another year making tools, and then start coming up with a game. We had to do it all simultaneously. And that was a very challenging situation, because you want to push the way, we make some environments that look really cool so it sells well, but then you realize you're going to have to destroy it because it's more than likely not going to work in the long run of the game, because we have no idea how many polys do we need, how much texture count, all that sort of stuff. So we just had trial and error, and we found that true with the Diablo series as well, where you have to play it to really know what the game is. You can't spec out this type of organic game. A lot of people try. Other types of games, it's a lot easier. And if you have the 07 Madden football, you kind of know what you're doing. You've been doing it for 12 years in a row. For us, we didn't know what it was going to translate like. Could we do first-person melee? We ended up not doing it because we played it and it was a little too weird. We had too many moves that we wanted you to see your character. In the same window, a big part of a role-playing game is dressing up your character. If you never see your guy, it's not quite as fun. So there was a lot of iteration, and we knew that off the bat, so we wanted to come up with a pipeline and methodologies that would allow us to read it really quickly. If we had to rebuild the whole level, we wanted to be able to do it as quick as possible. And then we also developed ways to be very data-driven, so that not only we didn't have to rely on data first time here. We didn't have to rely on the programs to hard code everything. That's what we ended up having with Diablo II, where we would come up with a new level, the Act 3 jungle, and have to explain it to a leveler. I had to go with a special tool and cut out the 2D tiles and then explain it to a programmer so they could, in code, tell how the level flowed and went. And it's a very laborious process to go back and forth and back and forth. So we wanted to give as much power to the artist and the level designer as possible to make changes. And if the level's playing 20 minutes too long, just change the spreadsheet number, and now it's 15 minutes long. And I'll explain a little later how that worked. But it really let us make radical changes in not only how big the levels were, but how many levels we had. We started out with the idea of having one town and 6 or 8 adventure areas, because we thought that's what we could get down with the people we had, and then we ended up with 8 towns and about 100 different adventure areas, so it just grew. And we think it made the overall experience better, because we got the pacing the way we wanted to. You could get to checkpoints and get to the level and finish a quest in a timely manner. It'd take you 3 or 4 hours to trek across the world. Don't get lost. Things like that. A lot of details, a lot of design criteria that just kept tweaking the gameplay. So with that in mind, we wanted to give the artist as much as possible within Maxis. Like, somebody didn't have time to develop these end-user tools. A lot of them, people like Unreal make this great engine that users can go and create. But we just didn't have that option. So we needed something that would work. And using 3ds Max was our answer. We've been using it for a long time. I've been using it since it originally came out, and prior to that, AutoCAD. So a lot of history. We knew the tool. We knew what it could do and how we could get it. How we could massage its features to export what we needed. And with that, RAD game tools, old industry standard for fake video, things like that. For any exporters, you would take a 3D Max file and export it into a GR2 format. And that just gave us a seamless transition. We just built our graphics engine around the GR2 format and converted from there. But what that meant, we didn't have to post-process it a lot. We could take a final room and put it into our tool and preview it. And then use the spreadsheets to dictate where it went and all that. And like I said, I'll get further into how that works specifically. But then when we needed to make a change, we could just do it at Max. We didn't have to redo everything. The export process is really quick. Just that for it to go. And then we decided outsourcing. Everybody's getting into outsourcing these days. And there were some things we could outsource, some things we couldn't. Level design, that's too proprietary, too many iterations. But things like vehicles, tanks, cars, street signs, weapons themselves, we could spec out a very detailed sketch and feel confident handing it off to an outsourcing partner and have them create something that worked. So we leveraged a lot of that, but the world itself is what I'd like to cover. So here's going back to the Diablo II days. It's all pre-rendered graphics, baked in the lighting. For the background, the real-time shadows for the characters. It was all sprite-based, so we did a lot of work in Max, just modeling and rendering the rooms, and then going into Photoshop, cleaning it up, touching it up, taking it into a special tool, and cutting out chunks, and those chunks got reassembled. Like I said, it ended up with a good end result, but it was a very laborious process. Too many people in the chain. You know, if you had to change something, you had to go through 3 or 4 people to get it to really work out. So zoom in on the one room. A room like this would be comprised of probably about 50 different tiles. Each sliver of wall was a tile that went up, and then you'd have to take that tile and put little dots on it saying what was collision for arrows, what player collision. So there's a lot of little details that you had to hand do. And we did it once, we didn't want to do it again. So for Hellgate, I said, okay, random world 3D, how are we going to make this thing happen? And then how can we make a big world without having to hire 100 background artists? Because we went through that experience at Blizzard with the World of Warcraft. Incredible game, but they had literally close to 100 background artists on that thing. This was so big, so unique, and everything. They had one master file that contained the whole world, and it got updated once a day, and you kind of have to check it in. And we were part of that process, watching it as a separate team. Okay, we don't want to do this whole continuous world thing either. That just, I mean, it's cool, but you don't get the random aspects, like we're used to, where it's room-based, where, you know, each time you go to a level, it's going to turn a different way, and go up or down or around, look back on itself. We really enjoyed that as a team, that style of game, because you can play it constantly, and it's always changing, so it's a lot of fun. Even when you're developing, we've been playing it for 4 years now, it just launched last week, and yet we're still all online, jumping up with the masses, and it's all fun, and it's continuously been fun. So that's definitely something that's great about a random world and random loot drops and item builds. The monsters get spawned with random attributes, which you end up in crazy situations, but it's cool because nobody's ever seen it before. None of the designers or anybody, because there's too many parameters that go together to create this unique thing. So we're always constantly swapping stories about, hey, did you see this boss? No. What was he like? Well, I couldn't kill him. Well, that's not so cool, but it kind of was. You get to this point where you're used to killing her, and then all of a sudden you get whooped, and it's like, okay, well, that's different. But it's fun. It keeps it lively. So this is an in-game world map showing basically how we started with an idea of the game being roughly that top right corner. A couple stations and a few hubs off of that, and each of those were going to take a few hours to get through. But after early prototypes, we decided, you know, it's not a lot of fun to get an hour into something and then get killed and then start and have to do it again. You know, we've all been gamers for decades now, and we realized that being knocked so far back in your gameplay is just not fun. So I said, okay, let's make mini levels. And so when we first came up with this idea, we called it mini level, and it just kind of stuck. And so all our spreadsheets had mini city or mini sewers, and there's no real rationale for it other than that's what it was at the time we created it. But as it is now, we have hubs, and the hubs are hexagons, and those are tube stations. Part of our fiction was to have the survivors of the demon apocalypse, all the people left in the world. We're going to huddle them in the tube stations, and then use the tube network as their way to get around. And it's kind of safe from the bad guys up above. Pretty simplistic, but it works. Pull a little bit out of the British history when they were hiding from the German U-2s back in the war down at the subway. So I think this is pretty cool. We can pretend like the Knights Templar built it from time, all this fictional history. And anyway, that gives us our backbone to the game. And so we just picked almost at random the tube stations in downtown London, and started off in Holborn Station, go to Covent Garden. So some of these names people recognize, if they've been to London or they're from London. And we did a lot of research on the ground there. I went over quite a few times, took tens of thousands of photographs of everywhere, but not doing literal recreations of things, because we didn't want to impinge gameplay by saying, okay, we have to build this down to the centimeter. We said, okay, what